This really simple but stylish Christmas stocking I've made with some of my own designs of fabrics. I hope you like them. It's very easy to make, but I think it's one of those really classic designs that's going to come out year after year after year, and it looks really expensive. This is a great way of saving money over Christmas, and it's a nice tradition to start as well, because you could actually personalise these so every member of your family has their own personal Christmas stocking. We're going to show you how to make the template, so you can make lots of these if you wish, and of course you can make them in different sizes as well. So you could maybe make very small stockings in the same way and then use those as advent calendars or tree decorations with little gifts inside. I think would be lovely. So let's get sewing. So the first thing we need to do is to make our pattern. Now these don't have to be exactly the measurements I give you, it's only a stocking after all, but this will make a nice substantial size Christmas stocking. I'm going to measure 7 inches across the top and I'm going to come down to 16 inches. And I'm going to draw a nice long rectangle. Again, you can make this larger, you can make it wider, however you wish. It's quite important that the top here is right angles there, and you'll see that as we start to put the stocking together. I need to make a curve around this section. So if you've got a 7-inch plate or some kind of template, then that would work. I'm just going to freehand draw a curve, and I think that's going to be fine. And then we'll cut out the shape. I'm just using A3 copy paper. I've joined a couple of pieces together. If you've got a piece of wallpaper or even newspaper, anything will be fine. Don't rush out and buy copy paper. And I'm using my paper scissors, not my fabric scissors. They used to be my fabric scissors, but I found a better pair. Okay, I'm going to hang on to that spare piece for now. Then I'm going to take my ruler back again, and from the end of the curve I'm just going to measure 6 inches and mark that on the left hand side. In fact, we could mark that all the way across because that's where we're going to cut. So take your scissors again, and we're going to cut right up to the line, but not all the way through the pattern. So just up to here, because now when I twist this part around, you can see the shape of the stocking developing. So the reason I've kept hold of my spare piece of paper is because that's going to fill in the gap. So when you've got this at the angle that you think works, I'm simply going to take some sellotape or any kind of sticky tape, stick this in place, and then I'll just join with a curve one side to the other. And then I'll cut out that curved ankle. It doesn't matter that there's a hole in the middle. So there is my Christmas stocking shape. So I'm going to cut 2 pieces from my pattern from my outer fabric and 2 pieces from lining. On the outer fabric, I've already put some fusible fleece on the back of here, so that makes it nice and thick and kind of luxurious. So I'll cut these both out at the same time. Your fabric can be right sides together or wrong sides together, it really doesn't matter. So I'll make sure it's straight. Hold it there with a few pins. And cut. So I'll need 2 from the outer fabric. My lining fabric, I'm just using a plain white that I already had in my stash because you're not really going to see that, so I didn't want to waste my beautiful Christmas fabric on lining. And I do have an extra piece which is going to make the cuff that goes around the top, but I'll come to that in just a second. Let's get these cut out first. So now I have 2 outer pieces that mirror image each other and 2 lining pieces of the same. To make the cuff that goes around the top, I'm going to use 2 pieces of fabric, and it's nice that this is contrasting as well, so they really stand out. And I'm going to measure them both to be 7 inches across, and then the depth of the cup that I need, and I'd like that to be quite nice and deep, so I'm going to use the whole width, which is 9 inches on my fabric. So if you've got a rotary cutter ruler and mat, that's probably going to be the easiest and the quickest way to actually cut these, but if you don't, we can mark with a pen and then cut with scissors. So I'm just neatening off the bottom of my little piece of fabric because it wasn't very square. And remember, this is going to be 7 inches wide, so the same as my stocking, 9 inches deep. This will be folded in half. So let's just cut along here. Now, if you wanted to add any kind of applique, or letters or names and things like that, it may be quite nice to do that at this point to the cuff. Just make sure you get it the right way around. Right, just trim off the bottom here. Okay. Because these are going to go, I'll sew them into a tube, but when they go onto the top of your stocking, the raw edge is going to be at the top. So if you have a patterned fabric, you need to make sure that it's going to be the right way round, not that way round. It's quite easy to do. So if you're going to put any kind of applique on here now, I would crease the centre point. This is going to be on the inside of your stocking, so you know that you can put any names or letters or pictures or Santa Clauses and Christmas trees just on that area, so that it's not going to disappear underneath the cuff. So we're finished with you, and we're finished with the paper scissors, and we can start to sew. So let's make the cuff up first of all. So I'm going to place the 2 pieces right sides together with the print in the same direction, and we're going to sew to make a tube. And I'm just using a 1/4 inch or a 6mm seam allowance. It doesn't really matter what the seam allowance, as long as you use the same all the way through. So let's just trim my threads. I'll turn this over. And again, make sure your fabric is the right way round with the raw edges at the top. So making those raw edges meet, and I can see already they're upside down. So let's just turn it over and make them the right side out. Put that to one side for now, while we sew the stocking pieces right sides together. Now again, if you wanted to add any applique, now's the time to do it. But do bear in mind, I'm going to have this cuff going around the top of my stocking. So any applique needs to be in this kind of area, not inside here. We'll sew all the way around. Now this time, where the concave curve is, I'm going to snip into that curve. Carefully don't cut through the stitches, but just cut up to them, and that'll help the seam to sit flatter. And I'm just going to trim away some of the seam allowance around the toe section, again to make the seam sit that little bit better. And then we'll turn this the right side out. So that's how my stocking is going to look. Then I'll need to sew the lining pieces together. But this time I'm going to leave a turning gap in the long side at the back, quite close to the heel, simply so that I don't see that inside the stocking. And a little bit of a tip for you. If you make the seam allowance just very slightly wider inside the stocking, just a tiny amount, then the lining will sit neater inside the stocking, it'll sit flatter. And that's a good tip if you're making bags as well. Right, let's start to piece it together. So, take your outer stocking and slip the cuff over the top. With the seams matching. And the top edge matching as well. Then I'm going to take a loop of ribbon that will be 10 inches long. Fold it in half, and I'm going to pin this to the back right over the top of the seam. And then I'm just going to put a few stitches across the top of the seams just to hold it in place before I put the lining in. So my sewing machine doesn't have a free arm. Just squish the seam open, make it a bit less bulky in there. So I tend to sew from the inside when I'm making anything like this. If you have a free arm on your sewing machine, then maybe you could take off the accessory compartment and slip this over the top, and it might make it a bit easier for you to sew. So again, just squishing the seam open. I'm not worried about pressing seams open on something like this, it's only a stocking. But it might make it a bit easier to sew if you don't have so much bulk over the seam. So I've just tacked the two sides in place where the seam is. Then we're going to put the whole thing inside the lining. I'm not worried about snipping into the curves of the lining, because in effect when the whole thing's finished the lining will always be inside out anyway. So push it inside. Don't worry about the toe going all the way into the toe, because we're going to turn it through in just a second. I just need to make sure that the edges around the top are meeting and the ribbon's tucked in. So again, match the seams. So you've got all 3 layers together, the lining on the outside, and then the cuff with the ribbon, and then the stocking on the inside. Now if you want to put a few pins in there, then you can do. It kind of stays in place when you sew it, so it's quite easy to use it without pins. And then I'm going to sew all the way around the top, this time with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And that's just to make sure that I catch all of the layers together. Then we can turn the whole thing the right side through. So pull it through the gap that you left in the side of the lining. Turn the lining the right side out as well. And there where the turning gap is, I'm just going to pull on either side of that. You'll find that the seam allowance folds in, and then we'll simply sew over the edge. Right, we're almost finished. All I need to do now is to push the lining inside the outer stocking all the way down to the toes. I'll just fold the cuff so it sits nice and straight around the top. And my stocking's finished. Unless I want to add an extra little bit of trim around the top, because I think this would suit some pom-poms. And I'm just going to glue these on. You could hand sew if you like, but to be honest, it's very unlikely that this stocking is ever going to go in the washing machine. So I don't mind just a little drizzle of strong wet glue right around the edge of the cuff. Don't go all the way around in one go, a little bit at a time. Make sure the tape isn't twisted, because it does tend to want to do that. So just carefully apply this to the glue. I think I'd leave one side to dry normally before I turn it over and carry on around the other side. But you don't want to sit and watch glue dry, do you? So right round to the back to where the 2 pieces meet. And there's lots of little things that you can use as embellishment if you wanted to. If you wanted to add buttons and things like that, or bows, maybe you've got some lovely Christmassy ribbon, or silver or gold would look lovely. But ultimately you have a really well-made traditional Christmas stocking that I think is going to come out and be enjoyed and be filled and be emptied year after year. So I'm just coming up to the back there and overlap slightly. And now my Christmas stocking's finished. I hope you enjoy making yours.